You ever hear your name whispered when no one's around? Out in the dark, where you know no one should be. That's not something we talk about lightly where I'm from. Out here in the high desert, the nights aren't just dark, they're different. The air turns thin and dry, the kind that sticks in your throat, and the silence feels like it has weight, like it's pressing down on you. You can stand alone in the middle of nowhere and look up to see billions of stars burning, so clearly it feels like you could reach out and touch them. But that beauty comes with a feeling you can quite shake, that you're really not alone. The desert never really sleeps. Even at midnight, you hear the shifting of dirt under tiny feet, the quick rustle of brush when there's no wind, the distant call of an animal in the dark. But if you grow up in Navajo country, you learn quick. Not all those sounds belong to animals. There's a word we have, Yi-nald-lushi, what outsiders call skinwalkers. They're not fairy tale monsters or campfire legends to us. They're witches, people who've broken every sacred law, given up their humanity in exchange for dark power. And that power lets them change into animals, coyotes, wolves, dogs, owls, crows, though they don't always get it perfect. If you've ever watched a coyote run, you know the way it moves smooth and wild. But imagine something trying to run like a coyote and not quite getting it right. The legs just a little too long, the joints bending oddly, the head turning farther than nature allows. That's when you know you're not looking at an animal at all, but something wearing an animal's shape like a mask. The elders teach us rules to stay safe. Don't whistle after dark. Don't go outside at night unless you absolutely have to. And if you hear your name coming from the shadows, don't answer. The most important rule? Don't talk about them unless you must, because even speaking about them could draw their attention. When I was a kid, I thought those rules were just ways to scare children into behaving, nothing more. But one summer night, I learned they were much more than that. I was about 10 years old, living in a small, single-story house way out from town. No neighbors, no streetlights, just us, a patch of cleared land and miles of desert in every direction. At night, the only light came from the moon and the pale wash of the Milky Way above. The air that night was warm, but not heavy, and we kept the windows cracked to let the breeze in. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, a sharp, high-pitched yip. It sounded like a coyote, but something about it twisted in my stomach. Normally, coyotes don't call out alone like that. They howl in a frenzy, voices overlapping and breaking in wild, unpredictable patterns. But this was steady, controlled, deliberate. Then came another yip, closer this time, and another. The pattern was too clean. My skin prickled and my heart started to pound in my ears. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, telling myself it was nothing, just a lone animal. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. After a long pause, I heard something that froze me in place. From just beyond my bedroom window, low and almost casual, came a voice. Hey. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It sounded like someone I knew, though I couldn't place who. Just friendly enough to make you want to look. Just familiar enough to make you doubt yourself. Every muscle in my body locked up, and in my head I heard my grandmother's voice as clear as if she were standing over me. Don't you answer. Don't you dare answer. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice didn't come again. Instead, I heard footsteps moving away, crunching against the dry dirt outside. Only they didn't sound right, too heavy for a coyote, but too light for a full-grown person. And the sound faded faster than it should have, like whoever, or whatever it was had simply melted into the darkness. The next morning, I told one of the elders what I'd heard. They didn't laugh, didn't tell me it was just my imagination. They stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "That wasn't a coyote." And that was all. No further explanation, no reassurance. Just that. And somehow, That short answer terrified me more than if they sat me down and told me the full truth. From that day forward, I followed the rules to the letter. I never whistled at night again. I never wandered far from the porch after sunset. And I never, ever answered when something called my name from the dark. People from outside the reservation tend to laugh at these stories. They call them myths, superstitions, relics from the past. But out here, skinwalkers are real, and they're patient. They watch from the shadows, they listen, and they mimic. Sometimes they'll copy the cry of an animal. Sometimes they'll use the voice of someone you trust. And sometimes they'll get so close to perfect that you want to know it's not them until it is far too late. That is why the elders always say the rules aren't just for kids. They for everyone. Because once they notice you, once they take an interest in you, they can follow for a long, long time. They don't rush. They don't need to. They wait for the right moment. And if you're not careful, you'll give them that moment without even realizing it. So if you ever find yourself in the desert at night, with nothing but the stars above you and the land stretching endlessly around, remember these 3 things. If you hear your name, don't answer. If you see an animal moving wrong, don't follow it. And if you feel eyes on you but can't see who's watching, get inside and stay there. Because here where the shadows stretch longer than they should, and the silence can suddenly feel alive, there is something out there that wears faces and skins that aren't its own, and it is waiting for you to make just one mistake. They say the desert teaches you to listen, to notice the smallest things, the way the wind changes the sound of gravel shifting, the difference between the call of a real owl and the sound of something trying to be one. By the time I was in my late teens, I'd learned those lessons well, and I thought I could tell the difference between the natural and the unnatural. That confidence didn't last long. This happened one winter, when the nights felt sharper, like the cold air itself could cut you. A friend of mine, Daniel, lived about 20 minutes away by dirt road, deep enough into the backcountry that cell service didn't reach. We'd grown up together, and most nights we'd hang out, play cards, talk about nothing. That night, I drove over just after sundown. His house was small and old, with the kind of wood that creaked when the temperature dropped, and it sat on a little rise overlooking a dry wash. I'd been there plenty of times before, but as I pulled up, I noticed something strange. The dogs weren't barking. He had 2 big shepherd mixes that usually made a racket as soon as headlights touched the driveway, but tonight, nothing. No sound at all. I parked and stepped out, the cold air biting into my cheeks, and as soon as my boots hit the dirt, I felt it, that heaviness. Not fear exactly, but pressure, like the land itself was watching me. I walked up to the front door, knocked, and Daniel let me in. His face looked tired, drawn. We sat at the kitchen table, and after a while, I asked where the dogs were. He hesitated, then said, "In the bathroom. They've been acting weird all day." I thought that was odd, but before I could ask more, we heard it, a slow, deliberate knock at the back door. 3 taps. We both froze. The knock came again. His back door didn't have a porch or steps. It just opened out onto bare dirt, leading straight into the brush. He whispered, "Don't move." The knock came a 3rd time, and then, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, came the words, "It's cold out here. Let me in." My skin went cold from the inside out. Daniel's eyes widened, and without a word, he reached over and locked the deadbolt. We sat there, barely breathing, listening as whatever it was started scratching lightly at the wood. Not like it was trying to break in, more like it was just letting us know it was still there. After a minute or 2, the scratching stopped. We waited another 10 before Daniel stood up and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. Just the pale wash of moonlight on dirt. But the dogs, they were pressed into the farthest corner of the bathroom, ears flat, trembling. That was enough for me. I told him I wasn't staying, and he didn't argue. I drove home faster than I should have, headlights bouncing over the rough road, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The whole way back, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see something running alongside the truck. For weeks afterward, Daniel said the dogs wouldn't go near the back door. Some nights, they'd growl low at nothing, staring at a point just beyond the tree line. A few months later, he moved into town, said the place never felt right again. People think skinwalkers only wander far from human homes, out in the untouched wilderness. But the truth is, they go wherever they want. They test doors. They watch windows. They learn your voice, your face, the way you move. And once they have that, they can use it. That is the thing that gets me. They don't just take the shape of animals. They take pieces of you. They wear them like masks. Out here, there are stories of people hearing their own voice, calling from outside, or seeing themselves standing at the edge of the property in the dark. Elders say it's a way to break you down, to make you doubt what's real. And it works. Because even knowing what I know, even remembering that night, there's still this part of me that wonders, what would have happened if I'd opened the door? If I'd stepped outside, would I have seen something in my own shape, smiling back at me with my own face? Or would I have just disappeared into the dark, my voice left behind for someone else to hear later? That's the kind of thought that stays with you. It changes the way you see the night. I don't just hear sounds anymore. I study them. I don't just see movement in the dark. I measure its shape, its rhythm. The desert still feels like home, but it's a home with locked doors and drawn curtains and an understanding that some things belong to the night and the night alone. So if you ever find yourself out here and you hear a knock after dark, remember this. The desert doesn't care how curious you are, and neither do the things that walk in it. Whatever's outside can wait. And sometimes, the only reason you're still breathing is because you didn't open the door when it asked. Deserts have a strange way of swallowing sound, but on a military base, there's always some kind of noise, the hum of generators, the clank of boots on gravel, the distant rumble of vehicles. That's why this next story has always stuck with me, because it didn't happen in some remote canyon or isolated house. It happened right in the middle of a place crawling with armed Marines. A friend of mine, Mike, served out here in the Southwest, stationed at a base surrounded by miles of nothing, just open land, sparse brush, and a horizon that never seemed to get any closer. He told me it started with what they thought was just a stray dog. One night, a group of Marines were on guard duty along the perimeter fence when they spotted movement out by the wire. The floodlights caught a shape, four-legged, medium-sized, maybe a coyote or a dog just pacing back and forth. But the way it moved was wrong. The legs were too long, the back slightly hunched, and every so often it would stop and just stare, its head tilting in this unnervingly slow, deliberate way. They figured it was just some weird desert canine and decided to shoo it off. Two of the guys walked toward it, rifles slung but ready. Mike was watching from the tower when he saw it stand up, not in a startled, clumsy animal way, but smooth, like it had always been meant to walk that way. Tall, lean, long arms hanging just a little too low. It turned toward the two Marines, and even from that distance, Mike swore he could feel its attention. Then it bolted, running faster than anything he'd ever seen, but not toward the brush. It ran along the fence line, just out of the floodlight's reach, until it melted into the dark. They reported it, but the higher-ups wrote it off as a trick of the light or a coyote with mange. But that wasn't the end of it. A few nights later, one of the guys on the midnight shift heard someone calling his name from outside his tent. It sounded exactly like one of his squad mates, but that squad mate was asleep just a few feet away. When he unzipped the flap to look out, there was nothing there, no footprints in the dirt, no sound of retreating steps, just stillness. Over the next week, It got worse. Guards would hear scratching on the metal siding of storage units. Shadows would dart between the tents when no one was supposed to be outside. And some nights, voices would call from the dark using the tones and inflections of people they knew. The weirdest part? None of the base dogs, the ones trained to patrol the perimeter, would go near the eastern side of the fence anymore. They'd plant their paws, growl low, and refuse to move forward. Mike said the breaking point came one night when he was up in the tower again. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Then, from down near the wire, he heard it, his own voice, clear as day, calling his name. Not someone calling to him, but him calling himself. He froze, and in that moment, he swore he saw something crouched just beyond the reach of the floodlights, its outline barely visible against the dirt. The head was too big for the body, the limbs folded at strange angles, like it wasn't made to sit that way. It didn't move. It just stayed there, watching. Mike didn't move either. He kept his rifle ready, but every instinct told him not to shoot, not because it wasn't a threat, but because doing so would only make things worse. After what felt like forever, it slowly backed away, sinking into the dark until there was nothing left to see. The next morning, they found prints in the dirt, but they weren't dog prints or human prints. They were a warped mix of both, elongated and deep, as if something heavier than it looked had passed through. Mike never saw it that clearly again, but the activity didn't stop. Sometimes it was voices. Sometimes it was movement in the dark. Sometimes it was the feeling of being watched so intensely that the hairs on your neck would rise without warning. Even on a base full of trained soldiers, with lights, weapons, and constant patrols, it was there, patient, testing them, learning their routines. When Mike's deployment ended, he told me straight, we had rifles, night vision, and enough ammo to light up the desert for a mile, and none of it mattered. That thing out there wasn't scared of us. It was just curious. And I think it liked being seen. That's the thing about skinwalkers. They don't care if you're armed, or if there's 20 of you, or if you're standing in the brightest light for miles. They'll still come close enough for you to see the way they move, to hear the way they can copy your voice down to the exact pause in your breathing. And they'll do it knowing full well you won't forget. So next time you think a military base is the safest place you can be, remember, fences are for keeping things in. Out here, nothing stops what wants to come in from the dark. Some people think skinwalker encounters only happen to the unprepared, the campers who don't know the rules, the tourists who wander off the trail. But the truth is, even seasoned locals get caught off guard. That's exactly what happened to my uncle, a man who'd spent his entire life on the reservation, someone who knew the old stories and followed the old ways. He wasn't the kind to scare easy. He hunted, worked the land, and knew the desert as well as anyone could. But one night, late in the fall, something came to his door that made him lock every bolt and stay awake until dawn. It started with the dogs. They were tough ranch dogs, half-wild themselves, used to chasing coyotes and keeping predators away from the sheep. But that night, they didn't bark. They didn't growl. They whimpered. My uncle was sitting in the living room, tending the wood stove, when he heard it, not from outside, but inside the yard, the crunch of boots on gravel. His first thought was maybe a neighbor or a relative had come by late, but when he glanced out the window, there was no one. The motion sensor light wasn't even on. Then the footsteps came again, slower this time, circling the house. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped to the window, but before he could shine it, he heard his own mother's voice call his name from the back of the property. She'd passed away years before. His hand froze on the light. That's when he remembered. Never answer. Never go toward a voice. You know if it's coming from the dark. He set the flashlight down and went for his rifle instead. The voice called again, closer this time, softer, almost coaxing. The dogs had gone silent, which was worse than their whimpering. Then he heard something scrape against the siding, like long fingernails dragging along the wood. He kept the rifle ready, but didn't move toward the door. The scraping stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate tapping on the window nearest him. Tap, tap, tap. Finally, he turned on the flashlight and swept the beam across the yard. Nothing. No tracks in the gravel. No sign of movement. But the moment the light passed over the edge of the sheep pen, he caught it. Two eyes reflecting back, not the yellow-green of an animal, but a flat, dull white, like the light was hitting something dead. And they were far too high off the ground for any coyote. He held the beam there for only a second before the eyes blinked. Not a normal blink, but a sideways one, like some reptiles have, and vanished. No sound of retreat, no rustle in the brush, just gone. He stayed inside until morning, every light on, rifle across his lap. When the sun came up, he walked the property. There were no prints near the house, but over by the sheep pen, the dirt was churned up like something heavy had been pacing back and forth. None of the sheep were missing, but they were clustered together in the farthest corner, eyes wide, refusing to move. That night was the last time he slept in that house alone. He started spending nights with relatives in town, only coming back during the day to tend the animals. Some folks might say it was just a predator, maybe a mountain lion or a trespasser, but my uncle swore it wasn't. He said whatever it was didn't move like anything alive, didn't sound like anything human, but it knew him, it knew his family, his voice, his history. That's what makes these encounters so dangerous. A skinwalker doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It studies you, learns who you are, what you fear, and who you trust. Then it uses that against you. That's why the elders tell us not to leave personal items lying around. No hair. No nail clippings, nothing with your scent on it, because those can be used in ceremonies to find you, to mimic you, to draw you out. My uncle followed all the rules, and still it came right up to his window. That is what people don't understand. Sometimes it is not about breaking a rule. Sometimes they come just to see if they can get inside without ever touching the door. And if you think you'd be brave enough to face it, ask yourself this. If you were sitting alone in your home and you heard the voice of someone you loved calling from the dark, would you have the strength to stay put? Or would you step outside and find out too late that the thing waiting for you wasn't to them at all? Out here, that's a question you might only get to answer once. Not all skinwalker stories happen out in the open desert or near lonely houses. Some happen where you feel safest, surrounded by friends, with a fire burning bright and laughter filling the air. That's what makes this one so unnerving. A few years back, a group of friends I knew decided to go camping up near the Mesa, a spot locals visit for its wide, open sky and views that stretch forever. It wasn't deep wilderness, just far enough from town that the stars looked like powdered sugar scattered across black velvet. They set up their tents, got a good fire going, and cooked dinner as the cold night crept in. The wind was calm, the air smelled like pine, and everything felt easy. Around midnight, as they were winding down, someone noticed a shape just at the edge of the firelight. At first, they thought it was one of their friends returning from the bush, but when they called out, the figure didn't answer. It just stood there, tall and still. The shadows played tricks with their eyes, making it hard to tell if it was facing them or turned away. Then it crouched, fast, in a way that didn't look right, and darted out of sight. Everyone laughed nervously, assuming it was a prank, but the friend they thought it was emerged from the opposite side of camp a few moments later, pale and confused, saying he'd been behind the tents the whole time. That's when the unease set in. They stoked the fire higher, trying to push the darkness back, but the night seemed heavier now, the sounds of the forest muted. Then came the voice, a perfect copy of one of the campers, calling from just beyond the ring of light. "Hey, come here. I found something." It sounded casual, curious, exactly how he spoke. But he was sitting right there by the fire, his face draining of color as the words left the darkness again, this time closer. Come here. No one moved. They all knew the stories, and they all knew better than to answer. The voice changed then, shifting to sound like someone else in the group, then another, cycling through every person there, mimicking tone, inflection, even little habits of speech. Finally, it tried something different, laughter. Not just any laughter, but the kind that starts low and builds, except this didn't sound human. It was too even, too precise, like it was playing back a recording. One of them, panicking, grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the trees. The beam caught something pale for just an instant, a flash of a face, but stretched, wrong, the eyes reflecting white like bone in moonlight. It dropped low to the ground and moved away without a sound, faster than they could track it. No one slept that night. They stayed huddled by the fire until dawn, the woods eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of something just out of sight. When morning finally came, they found faint impressions in the dirt around camp. Not quite footprints, not quite paw prints, but something in between, spaced far apart, as if whatever left them had taken huge, unnatural strides. They packed up fast, not even stopping for breakfast. Later, one of them told me he thought about that night for weeks, not because of what they saw, but because of how it sounded. He said hearing your own voice, calling you from the dark, is worse than seeing anything, because for a split second, your brain wants to trust it. That's how they get you. They don't rush in teeth first. They lure you out. They wait for you to step into the shadows on your own. And the thing is, out here, you can't always trust your eyes, but you want to trust your ears. You want to believe that the voice you know belongs to the person you love. That's why, when you hear your name whispered in the night, the most important thing you can do is nothing at all. No answer, no step toward it. Just sit still and let the fire burn high until the sun comes up. Because once you cross into the darkness, you might never come back, at least not as yourself. Some stories feel distant, like they belong to someone else's life, safe to repeat because you know they'll never touch yours. But then there are the ones that creep in close, stories told in low voices by people who are still watching the door as they speak. This last one came from a Navajo police officer named Daniel, a man with over a decade on the job. The kind of person who doesn't scare easy because he has already seen what the night can do. He was working the late shift, patrolling the outskirts of the reservation when the call came in. A woman alone at her home, saying something was trying to get inside. No signs of forced entry, she said, just scratching at the walls and tapping on the windows, and then a voice outside calling her name. When he pulled up, the place was dark except for a single lamp in the front room. The woman was pale, shaking, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. She swore she'd heard her dead brother's voice outside the window, telling her to open the door. Daniel checked the yard. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no animals. But as he circled the house, he caught movement at the tree line, something low, pale against the dark. He shined his light on it, and it froze, eyes reflecting light like glass. Then, in a voice so clear it made his skin crawl, it said, "Officer, over here," mimicking the exact tone of his own voice. That was enough. He raised his sidearm, ordered it to show itself. But instead it rose, too tall, too thin, its joints bending wrong as it stepped into view. Even at a distance, he could see its mouth wasn't moving in sync with the words. It spoke again, still in his voice. "Come here." Every instinct told him to back away, but training kept him steady. He kept the gun aimed and slowly retreated to the front door, telling the woman to lock everything and stay away from the windows. The thing followed, moving along the edge of the yard, always just outside the reach of the porch light. Then it stopped and crouched, its pale face still turned toward him, watching, waiting. He called for backup, but before they arrived, it did something that chilled him worse than the mimicry. It began knocking on the door. Not pounding, not scratching, knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. And then, in the woman's voice, it said, "It's okay. You can open it now." Backup finally arrived, but by then, it was gone. They searched the area, found nothing but deep, misshapen prints in the dirt, and a patch of ground near the tree line that looked like something heavy had been sitting there for a long time. Daniel told me later it wasn't the only time he'd seen it, just the closest. Once you've seen one, he said, you start to notice little things, the wrong shadow in your headlights, a voice in the distance where no one should be, the way the dogs go silent for no reason at all. He said the scariest part, I intend if they can come right up to your door. It's that they don't have to. They can stay just far enough away to make you wonder if you really saw what you think you saw. And they're patient. They can wait weeks, months, even years before coming close again. That night, after the call was over, Daniel parked on a hill outside town, turned off his radio, and sat in the dark for an hour, just listening. He said the desert felt too big, too empty, and yet somehow too full, like every inch of it was holding its breath, waiting for something to move. He finished by telling me one thing I haven't forgotten. It's not about fear. Fear is quick. It comes and goes. This is something else. They want you thinking about them. They want you listening for them. Because the moment you start listening, they know exactly where you are. So if you ever find yourself in the quiet dark of the desert, and you hear a voice you know calling you from just beyond the light, don't you answer. Don't move. Don't even breathe too loud. Just remember that something out there already knows your name, and it is patient enough to wait for you to step into the dark, all on your own.